Well, while they're miking us up, thanks, Adi, for the great introduction. Thank you, Clarence. Thanks to the NLC team. Thank you all for being here. Yeah, I am delighted to be moderating this discussion with Senator Booker. I mean, I could throw in another New Jersey joke. I had about 4 of them all kind of queued up. My family all still lives there, and really proud to be in that great state. But for all of you who are not from New Jersey, you're also doubly lucky to be here because I think that there probably isn't somebody right now in the Senate for sure who is a bigger champion of the issues that we're talking about here with widespread broadband deployment than Senator Booker. Not just because he fundamentally recognizes how important broadband is to the national economy, to places, and to how we're all moving, but because he understands that even though we've had really massive broadband deployment in this country in the infrastructure in recent years, the real challenge that we have right now, as we were brought up at the beginning, is making sure that that adoption cuts across all segments of society. As Adi mentioned, we've done a great job getting broadband into neighborhoods. The challenge that we have is in bridging that digital divide, providing affordable broadband service to more and more low-income families and households. The work that Adi and Joe Kane have shown is that that's really where the real challenge that we have at this part is for our country. So the people part is really where we're going to focus most of this discussion. We're going to talk a little bit about getting more physical access. That's certainly a big part of the discussion. But what we're not going to talk about are things about like what's in the wires. So we're not going to talk about net neutrality here at this conversation. If you want to talk about that, there's probably 3 or 4 other events happening in Washington today that are going to get into that.
And in various courtrooms, right?
That's right, and boardrooms. But the purpose of this session then is going to be how to get more people online. That's really where we want to target this. So how do we do that? What does a federalist approach look like? How do we get the federal, state, local, and metropolitan entities to work together? And as Clarence was saying, engage in true partnerships with the private sector. It's not all going to be completely government-driven, but the things that we're seeing at the Metro program, as the Senator and others can attest to, that the real innovation that we see that's happening around the country is happening outside the Beltway. It's happening in these cities in the metropolitan areas. We have a great panel that's going to talk about the state and local innovations next. As former mayor of Newark, obviously the Senator can talk about those issues firsthand. But as Adi mentioned, we're going to focus first here on the federal role. We had the FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler here on this very stage over the summer who laid out kind of his vision. But I'd love to hear from you just in your own words about the importance of broadband, kind of what we said at the beginning. Why is it so important now, and are we doing enough to connect people who need the access?
Right, and first of all, it's great to be here. And Brookings has been working with me since I was a mayor and has been an extraordinary organization to partner with. When I was a mayor, I used to always say, God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. And having a sort of a data-based think tank really empowered me. And of course, in National League of Cities, I am a part of that organization in many ways. Having been a mayor, it's just wonderful to have this forum hosted by both. I found that once you have a why, the how becomes a lot easier. And if you can get more people to share the why, then you're going to motivate more of a how. And for me, coming to Washington, wanting not to be this Democratic senator, I wanted to be a senator that gets things done. I knew I wanted to be a bipartisan senator. And so finding ways to work across the aisle, finding Republicans to partner with on these issues. And I actually thought technology and innovation is a space that is made for bipartisanship, that this would be sort of a central thrust to my work. And so when I sit down even with my Republican colleagues, I talk about the why, that here we are a nation, number one, everybody understands that we are now in a globally competitive economy, knowledge-based economy, where our country is competing fiercely now with China, with India, with the EU. And if you start looking at these objective indices of competitiveness, you begin to understand that unless America makes some significant changes, we as a country are going to start declining as an economy relative to our competitive nations. The World Economic Forum, OECD, puts out all of these indices of economic competitiveness. They look at infrastructure investment. We used to have the best in the globe. Now we're about number 12 to 18, depending on whose indice that you look at. They look at overall education. We used to be the top country in the globe for educating, graduating people from college, and that included the STEM subjects. Now we've fallen out of the top 10. And so when I have those larger global conversations, and I talk about what I think is a critical indice for long-term competitiveness, which is related to education, which is broadband penetration, you start to understand that this country that did, with Al Gore and other heroes, invent the internet, that we now literally have a nation that is 24th in broadband penetration. And the internet now, and I always say this as well, is one of the most incredible democratizing forces on the globe. And if you think about what's happening globally with the internet in terms of the democratizing force of it, it's democratizing education. I can now go online and access education and information in ways I couldn't before. It's democratizing access to capital. We started in Newark an online platform. We didn't start it, we brought them into Newark, called Kiva, which is helping minority, mostly women, were our first Kiva entrepreneurs, getting access to $5,000 and the like. It's democratizing work. If you look at a group like SamaSource, who takes micro work, goes to developing nations and helps to create incredible economic opportunity. You can think of every element of our society that's being democratized, and even old institutions that were these massively strong institutions are being shaken, from banking to even media as we know it. Just a few years ago, Huffington Post or BuzzFeed, nobody would know what I was talking about just mentioning those. And so when you see the power of the internet in transforming culture, in expanding economic opportunity, and then you think the numbers that were just given before, that 10, 20, 30% of Americans are not even engaged in the internet at home. When you compare our schools to the British schools with their access to the internet and how much they're integrating that, that's the challenge. And the workforce of 10 years from now will be radically different than the workforce today. And the skills that we need for this economy right now, not to mention 10 years from now, it's sort of stunning to me how we're having a training dislocation, that we're not training people for the jobs. I sat at a hackathon in Brooklyn for minorities. It was a coin I termed the black hack, and I had one company stood up and said, "Look, we are hiring people at six-figure salaries." One guy, he said, I hired didn't have a ninth grade education, but was an extraordinary coder, and we needed him so bad. When I talk to friends of mine who lead some of the brand name companies that we know, internet companies that we know, and they talk to me about the fierce competition they have for engineers in Silicon Valley because there's so much demand. When we know right now there's millions of jobs in America that are going unfilled because we haven't done the skills, this all comes down to the internet divide. The whole pipeline in our country is, to me, a serious part of it is about this problem of broadband access. And I'll end with this extraordinary data point. So I've come to understand the power of diversity that we have in our country. It is an asset in this nation that many of us don't appreciate, that other countries don't have this asset. And we have seen how it has enriched our culture in profound ways, from the arts to athletics, to incredible scientists, from a hero of mine, Neil deGrasse Tyson, to another hero of mine, Mae Jemison. You see what the diversity of our country, what it offers every sector of our society. And then you look at one little area where venture-backed companies, venture-backed tech companies, what percentage are Black and Latino? 1%. 1% are Black and Latino. Now think about that. If we said every other sector is going to have 1%, 1% of our arts is going to be Black and Latino, 1% of athletics is going to be Black or Latino, what we would deprive our nation of when it comes to that diversity if we looked at it that way. And so when you understand this, when I talk to companies like Google and Facebook and their leadership about this problem, they understand that they need to do more when it comes to their hiring practices, which every company, and including the Senate, is not the greatest place for diversity either. But they also go right to the problem of this pipeline, that children at their earliest ages are not getting exposed to the internet and technology in the ways that are necessary to start cultivating the genius and really turn the attention back to that. And so as mayor of Newark, when I would visit my city and knock on doors and go into homes and see how, while I would go to suburban homes in towns like I grew up, and the internet would be, broadband access would be front and center, to go into thousands, hundreds and thousands of homes in Newark and see that they had no access. It was almost like we were saying, and yesterday was the 150th anniversary of the 13th Amendment. But we know that imprisonment of the body is tragic and an offense to humanity. But imprisonment of the mind is equally offensive. And when you put people in a prison where they have no access to the technologies of today, that is a sin as well in a country. And we've got to do something about this American sin.
So let's drill on that. So how do we get that access to everybody? So I think as the data that Adi and folks have shown is that we're getting, the penetration's getting out there, people are adopting internet in their homes, but we're not getting that last bit. So what do we do? What can you do as a senator? What can you do on the federal level to make sure that the last bit of folks are actually getting connected?
Well, one big thing that I've worked on that is very important to me is that I learned as a mayor is that mayors in America are the incubators of innovation in American government in extraordinary ways. And I learned, I always call Michael Bloomberg, like, first of all, Mayor Bloomberg gave me the best political advice I've ever had in my life, which if you're thinking about running for politics, write this down. He said, Cory, before you become a mayor, become a billionaire. And I did not
write it down. It's not gonna help.
I didn't write it down. Somebody take that advice. But I always called mayor, Bloomberg was like the Nick Fury of American mayors. He would call together the Avengers, and lots of mayors would sort of go, and we would talk about innovation, and he started creating really great forums with which us to share ideas. And whenever I found I would meet mayors, from Michael Nutter, from Mayor O'Malley, I would ask them, hey, what's working? What innovation are you doing? And for me, I told my staff at the very beginning that we were going to do everything we could to steal the best ideas from mayors across America and bring them to Newark, New Jersey. And so these innovators often hit bureaucratic obstacles to innovating in the ways they could. And these innovators actually have great assets. They have, like Newark was dealt some of the best hand of cards of any mayor you could have. So we have transportation superstructure, biggest college town with NJIT, Rutgers, Seton Hall, right there in our city. We had a metropolitan area that was connected to everything from New York City to Philadelphia. So all these assets that we had, but we started finding with some of the areas we wanted to innovate that we would hit legal or bureaucratic boundaries. And so one of the things that I started realizing was, for me, the internet was a transformative a platform for me in just governance. And I started using even social media platforms in ways that, as I was talking in the green room before I came in, that literally helped us to save lives. But I started realizing that many other cities are in states where they're passing legislation trying to stop the innovation, the local innovations that are possible. And specifically, what I mean by that is this idea of municipal broadband as an option for municipalities to think of creative public-private partnerships or anything necessary to help bridge that last few feet into homes and into schools. And so for me as a senator now, what I want to do is unleash the innovation of these mayors around our country by removing that. And that's why I didn't pass it yet, God forbid we pass something in Washington. I introduced the Broadband Innovation Act to try to stop this bar that states were saying that cities can't innovate. It's almost, to me, counter to what is one of the ideals I respect about Republicans is that they let localities make their own decisions and choose their own destiny. So that's definitely one. And then supporting some of those programs that is not, many people want to try to criticize a social safety net as saying these are handouts. Well, if there's anything that's more of a hand up than a handout, then access to education, something we all believe in, public education. There's funding programs that help rural areas especially, as well as cities, families bridge that gap so that they don't have that poor families who are operating at the poverty line, which is a federal number, which makes no sense in regions like the New York City region where the cost of living is so much higher, helping families financially to bridge that gap so that they can get access to internet. These are things the federal government should be committed to because they're investments that make a return on investment that's pretty extraordinary.
I think you're right that restricting the ability of states to innovate doesn't make any sense, particularly the places where we see it happening. But is the idea then that cities will be able to bridge that last bit better, you think, than the private sector, or is it really just about creating more competition?
Well, for me, it's the former. I mean, right now, as a guy who believes deeply in the free market, if you just allow the free market, it's actually not working. The financial incentives for a lot of companies to bridge that last inches often is just not there, and it's not covering our country. And so where the free market is not working, we've got to create I think, a public pathway to access not homes, not access broadband. I say that public pathway to access the genius, the untapped genius of particularly poor kids and rural poor kids. And so for me, it's not about creating more competition. It's about getting the job done. I'm an ends-oriented person. I will tell you right now, I believe the private sector can do a significant amount of things much better than government has. In fact, government, as I found out as mayor, there's a lot of things we just did very badly, and we needed to get out.
The bureaucracy and the regulatory challenges.
Bureaucracy, regulatory challenges. So for me, it's just about what is the best way to get what the private sector or what the free market is not doing to connect that. And what I'm finding, still using Newark as an incubator, is that when we started to collaborate with private sector people, we started to see tremendous opportunities. So recently in Newark, we announced that we're trying to now replicate what are some of these incredible tech incubators around the country that are growing up and becoming incredible hubs for developing technology, especially amongst underrepresented minorities and women. But we also realized that we had this incredible rich fiber going underneath the city that it was very easy actually to tap into and to create this wonderful, in fact, arguably some of the highest speed free Wi-Fi in the country. And that if we did that, especially around our downtown, it would actually help our universities and entrepreneurs and other innovators. But more than that, understanding why did Silicon Alley grow up? Why did Silicon Valley grow up? It's this incredible sort of mix of access to information technology, access to educated people, access to universities, and the free high-speed Wi-Fi actually is just another variable in that equation that's going to help us to create a dynamic outcome that will not only help to connect people to the internet, but help to reclaim an American city and create a vibrancy and a dynamism that really is a creative cauldron that we just don't know what can flourish from that.
And I want to go to the audience. I know we have some folks with some questions. I think there's some folks tapping in on Twitter too. But I wanted to, on that last piece, the free Wi-Fi is one thing. But how do you get folks to, even if we have deployment in these cities, how do you make it more affordable for folks? I know in the federal level, you've been talking about the Lifeline program. Chairman Wheeler was talking about that.
Yes.
How do you actually make it affordable for folks who simply don't have the means to access it?
Right, and that goes down to that. That's one of the rubs here in Washington is does the government have a role in finding ways to subsidize that? And I think fundamentally yes, because I equate it with the federal role and the state and local role in subsidizing education. We have come to a point in human existence where you cannot dissect education from internet access. You just cannot do it. Now people talk about the homework divide, that when kids go home, just having the ability to access the internet not only helps them complete assignments, but it actually stimulates curiosity. And when I talk to all my friends who are successful tech entrepreneurs, that's what they'll talk about, that insatiable curiosity that came about from them taking apart an early stage computer and realizing how it works. Well, the vastness now of the information on the internet can draw children in ways that is incredible. And parents who want to do more than their schools, the Khan Academies and a lot of other tools that are out there now for parents who may not have the money even to go to tutors and some of the other chains that have opened up. It is so essential. So if we are a society that says fundamentally, in accordance with our ideal of equal opportunity, that we think public education is something we're committed to, we can no longer say public education without having within that definition a robust access to broadband.
And I think you're right about particularly where the deployment is lacking. I think we oftentimes think, well, it's a rural issue because it's spread out, it's hard to get economies of scale and all that stuff. But when you look at some of the cities, particularly in New Jersey, was really surprised at some of the data we were looking at show that the state actually is a high flyer when it comes to broadband adoption. It's one of the top states, as there is. But the cities are actually where the real struggles are. Places like Camden, places like Passaic, well below 50%. So how do you actually, in those particular places, in those cities that have unique challenges, is there a specific response we need for those kinds of places versus a rural area or something else?
So first of all, within your question is a very important point to make. And we talk about the wealth divide now more and more in America. When I was mayor, we used to always talk about a multiplier effect. So you build a business and it has a multiplier effect. My port has a multiplier effect because it's not direct port jobs, but so many other ancillary benefits are going to come from that. And the challenge is that it works in the reverse. That if this divide that is a wealth divide, this divide that is a housing divide, if you add into that now the internet, what you're going to create is a multiplier effect of disadvantage that just grows and grows and grows over time. And so we have a serious problem in this country. Not the wealth divide in and of itself, but what it means for our inability now to access the genius, the untapped genius. We found new ways to exploit difficult to find oil and other petroleum reserves, but we're not understanding that not tapping that genius of disadvantaged populations is really hurting our overall economy. And then when you inject into that a technological sort of overview, a lens of technology access, it is really going to just make this problem worse as you understand the jobs of the future are more and more technology based. And so this divide that we're all talking about bridging is just going to get wider and wider and wider. And New Jersey is an interesting state. And I remember a New York Times article when I was just starting out in politics that talked about Connecticut and New Jersey being the two highest wealth states in the nation. With the highest per capita income, they were battling back and forth. This is in the 90s. But they had 3 or 4 of the poorest cities in the country. And it was a stark reality to me that this existed. And so this is a real problem, as you said, from Paterson, Camden, Trenton, Newark, a real problem that if we don't focus on these dense populations of young people, all of the other issues we talk about, from crime and violence to environmental challenges, you name it, are just going to be exaggerated. And we could find ourselves tragically 5-10 years from now, not only from the wealth divide being greater, but the very idea spiritually of America now being undermined, as this is a place where anybody born in any circumstance can make something of themselves. I will tell you this right now, that this idea of the American dream, that we are a place where anybody can make it, is relative to our other countries, our competitor countries now. They are now beginning to do better on us, and an important indice of social mobility, the ability for someone born poor to go further. And so if you look at a country like England versus the United States, where everything from 52% of median income in the United States to go to college, in England it's about 7% of median income to go to college. But if you look all the way down to their grade school, their equivalent of our grade school, you're going to start seeing that they are embracing for their poor communities technology, broadband access, much better. Germany as well, Japan, South Korea. Go through what they're doing in terms of access to the internet for their kids, compare it to us, and I'm telling you, they are threatening us to take away our American dream and be better exemplars of it. And I refuse to let that happen. That we should still be the place that cultivates that genius of our country and elevates, in terms of opportunity, everybody to have a fair shot at contributing. And this is not about helping Latino, Puerto Ricans or Dominicans in Paterson. This is about the whole country benefiting, because we are a nation that knows that this diversity is an asset, but unless we do something about it, the differences are going to fester and we're going to have problems.
I want to be clear, it's definitely not just a city problem. My wife is doing this in Northern Virginia. Right. Now it's a fundamental, as Adi talks about a lot, you need an email just to apply for a job at McDonald's. So it's a fundamental tool in moving up the social chain for sure. So I want to take a few questions. I think we have just a little bit of time. If you can, so Webster defines a question as an interrogative form statement addressed to someone in order to get a reply. So I do my own speeches, but we'll stay away from speeches if we possibly can. If you can introduce yourself and keep it quick, thanks.
Sure. And if you're from New Jersey, raise two hands because we will preface you in terms of picking on it.
I've been there. I'm Martin Chavez with the Hispanic Technology Telecommunications Partnership, 19 national Latino organizations, 12-year mayor of Albuquerque.
Oh, right.
Wanted your perspective on internet access taxes. It's a cost, and of course that's an issue having to do with that impacts adoption.
Internet access taxes.
Sure, you got to measure up there, I think today or tomorrow, to make it permanent, the ban on taxes. So
I'm still trying to understand. Hold on. Internet access taxes, in other words, sales tax on the internet, or are we talking about, help me out here.
It's the Internet Tax Access Act.
Yes.
And there's a measure up there today, I believe, to make it permanent. And there are any taxes that local governments might impose for access to the internet.
Okay, understood.
But basically, it's an adoption issue.
Right, and
kind of putting the utility model on, flipping that a little bit.
Yeah, and so look, I'm not going to endorse anything. What I'm saying is we've got to find a way to fund this. And this is one model and one way, in my opinion, to do so. But there's other creative models that localities have found. And remember, in Newark, we were granting easements to telecom companies, giving them pretty extraordinary access to rip up our roads and lay their fiber. So again, I have this problem even with just infrastructure as a whole, as a country, is how we're going to pay for it. While you'll see our European competitors with very high gas taxes, that seems to be often a dirty word in Washington. But I'm telling you right now, I know if I had to ask us as a nation, as a business, do we want to invest as taxpayers in our roads and bridges? New Jersey has spent about $2,000, almost $2,000 a year of extra costs because of an inadequate infrastructure, damage to cars, challenges with idling in traffic and the cost of gas, and a moderate gas tax, which would fix a lot of that and diminish that $2,000, is less on a balance sheet analysis, is less than they're paying now, and they would get a tremendous return on investment. I see the same thing with broadband, and that's why I support creative measures to bring more revenue in to complete the last few inches.
And there probably isn't anything that gets people more upset than digging up streets over and over again to do things. So I know they were trying to pack something into the transportation bill around dig once so that we can connect up. When you're ripping up a road, that's a perfect time to lay some fiber. Right. Let's go back here.
Yes, Harold Feld from Public Knowledge. I just wanted to ask you, since you mentioned things like the free Wi-Fi, one of the key assets that the federal government does control is access to spectrum. And I know that from working with you and your staff that you guys have recognized that potential, cared a great deal about that in the past. I wonder if you might say some things about what the federal government could do on spectrum policy to help unleash these local solutions.
Yeah, you're going to give me. I mean, this is one of the areas I was surprised at the fight that I sort of stepped into, and this has no partisanship to it whatsoever. I introduced a Wi-Fi Innovation Act with Marco Rubio, and he and I ticked off Democrats and Republicans when we did it, which is always a sign that you're probably doing something right. But we just knew this is one of the most valuable assets there are, and as you said, the government controls it, and we should be using that scarce, valuable resource in as equitable a way as possible. And back in the 1990s, the government was giving large chunks of that spectrum away to organizations like the auto industry, who just sat on it, parked on it. It's like somebody buying a bunch of real estate in a city and not building anything, which ticks off us mayors, by saying that, well, one day we might need this for the safety of vehicles. And as soon as we put this bill in, which said we should study this, and if it doesn't impede upon the safety and security of people, we should share this access with other people. It was like we declared war, and the auto industry started motivating to stop us in really ways that shocked my staff and I, what they were willing to do to stop us. Meanwhile, off to Israel and this is when I think the president's supposed to walk in, when I start making the off to Israel, where they're realizing that cars, in order for safety and security, don't need Wi-Fi. What they more need is camera technology, laser technology, other technologies that can identify objects or other vehicles, whether they have Wi-Fi or not. Remember, this is V2V technology, which involves two cars communicating over Wi-Fi spectrum. Well, what if that other car doesn't have Wi-Fi spectrum, or what if that moose doesn't have Wi-Fi spectrum? you still want to be able to have your car react. So we're pushing, and I'm fighting to try to liberate as much Wi-Fi spectrum for critical safety, because remember, Wi-Fi is important now for telehealth issues. I can go through all the ways Wi-Fi is going to be used in the future to help keep us safer, stronger, and more enlightened. So this is something I'm going to continue to fight to have a more equitable distribution of that precious resource in this country. And by the way, this is now my chief of staff is probably going to run up here to try to silence me, but even the military, which sits on a lot of this Wi-Fi, we need to make sure that the public good is being served in the biggest possible. We need to not necessarily have people be able to park on this territory and not give it up, even though they themselves are not using it now, nor do they foresee them having it being necessary.
We'll just leave that one just for let that percolate a little bit. I know the senator has to go, unfortunately. We could talk about these issues clearly all day. We're going to stay involved in this issue. I know that the senator is going to stay involved. I think we just barely started to scratch the surface. Even just during the Q&A here, we've heard it start to uncover lots and lots of different issues, from transport to accessibility and the financial piece of it. So I want to thank you very much for the very engaging conversation. I want to thank you all for the great questions. We have a great panel coming up next. Please join me in thanking Senator Booker.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.